Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond. Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, joined with my usual co-hosts, Matthew Fairburn, also of The Athletic, and Jonah Bronstein from Bronstein Global Solutions. Joined this day, and a big day, perhaps, in Sabres history, by @Sabres Prospects, Kris Baker. It's been a while since we've had our old friend on the show. Kris, thanks for doing this.
Tim, Matt, Jonah, hello. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy UPL Day.
Yep.
He's going to start tonight against the Bruins. I guess before we get started, we're going to talk about Don Granato, and we'll talk about whatever. I'm sure we'll get into some Jack Eichel. We'll get into Sam Reinhart. We'll get into your thoughts on the trade deadline, since this is the first time we've spoken to you since then. But let's talk about UPL, because he is starting tonight. And fans have been waiting for this for a while, and I know you have too. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely coming earlier than planned. I think if you go back and you look at what the Sabres wanted to do with him, a lot of these NHL teams now, they do studies on, historical prospect development to understand the number of minutes or number of pro games a prospect needs to go through at the AHL level or sometimes the Coast League level when you're a goalie. And, he's nowhere near that. If you looked at those minutes, it would have really required him to be in Rochester again next year before this day would have come. So it's a little early, I think, per the plan, but sometimes you have to deviate from your plan when the conditions mandate it. So, they're going to throw him in there, and the hope is that, he's a goalie that historically performs really well when guys in front of him do their jobs. So I think even though this is a young group, and you look at, Will Borgen last night, so Thursday night Sabres game, I think Will Borgen at 24 was one of the elder statesmen, defensemen that were on the roster. It's a young group, but I think they know that it's a big moment for the young goaltender, and they have to tighten it up and play well in front of him. And that's kind of the hope here. I think it is early though for him. But at the same time, we'll see. It's a good opportunity for the Sabres development staff to see what the kid's made of, and they'll go from there.
For those who might not be so voracious in their fandom of the Sabres that they've really given UPL a good look or followed what he's been doing in Rochester, what's your thumbnail assessment of where he is right now and just how you think his future is shaping up?
Big goalie, big body. That's the prototype for the NHL now. You don't see a lot of 5'11", 6-foot guys drafted. So for him, he is the plan right now. And I think the last time that I joined the Tim Graham and Friends show, you guys call it a podcast, I like to call it a show. We talked about what's the plan in net, right? So, I think he was 54th overall a couple years ago, did a tour of duty in Finland after, and then came over here in the OHL Player of the Year. He has a track record of performing. So, he's not this twitchy, ultra fast goalie. He does read the play well, and I think that's part of that 10,000 hours that, requires to make it to the NHL is understanding all these patterns that come at you when guys enter the zone. There is an adjustment when you come over from Europe. Things happen quicker in the North American game. I think he successfully made that adjustment. This was a goalie that had double hip surgery before the 2019-20 season. So it kind of delayed his entry, went down to Cincinnati in the Coast League, really was just a high performer down there. Now, he hasn't set the world on fire statistically in Rochester. And I think that's what a lot of people will see if you're judging him by his numbers. When you watch him play, though, he reads the play well. He tracks the puck all the way in from the shooter stick into his body. He does a good job there. I think that what you're going to see, though, if Boston has done some scouting work on him, look for some shots going high glove on Luukkonen tonight. I think that's where these teams are going to attack. That's where he's susceptible. But he's not this fast, twitchy, acrobatic guy. He's not Pekka Rinne. He's a little more methodical. He's an intelligent player. When you talk to the Sabres staff, they talk about how he's got the right mental outlook. He'll understand how to stay the course. So if this is a goalie that doesn't have a good outing tonight, I think he's one that knows he can keep his highs low and his lows high, stay the course. This isn't going to be deleterious to his development if he has a bad game tonight. So I focus on still the big picture with him. This is not his arrival. This shouldn't be seen as his arrival. This is seen as he's here because the conditions warranted him coming up and plugging a hole.
Yeah, I was just about to ask, the perception will probably be from the outside, this guy's starting, he's arrived, this is the moment. But you said this is a little bit early. What do you think the next couple of years look like for him? Realistically, you know, what should the path that they take with him look like? And then how does the rest of the net come together around him? Do you build the net around him? Do you make him a secondary piece? How do you kind of view that?
So when you go back to before this season started, okay, they wanted Jonas Johansson to be the guy that they could ink to a 2-year contract in order to expose Johansson to Seattle in the expansion draft. And I think through those negotiations, I can't confirm this, but we've been here before. You know, Johansson's been around for a while. I think his agent knows that it was kind of make or break for him, where he perceived leverage, where that second year had to be NHL guaranteed salary. Sabres weren't prepared to give that to him, so then they had to pivot. They bring in Dustin Tokarski, give him a 2-year deal. So the idea would be Tokarski, Luukkonen this year in Rochester, have the veteran paired with the young guy in Luukkonen, really rely on Luukkonen, and Tokarski's there to guide his development and also share the net at the AHL level. Then you expose Tokarski. Now Tokarski, it turns out, is a more viable NHL backup than Carter Hutton. Carter Hutton, you look at him, he makes everything look hard. He's always out of position, right? But I don't want to get away. I'll go down a tangent if I start talking about Carter Hutton, okay? Carter Hutton's going to be a UFA. He's bye-bye.
And he's 35.
And he's 35, right? So, I mean, he's back to being really what should be probably an AHL goalie. Carter Hutton, by the way, Mitch Korn did amazing work with him in their time in Nashville, and all that work seems it's gone. He's back to where he was, 8 years ago. But again, I digressed. So just shut me up there about Hutton. I think the plan, though, moving forward, I think Luukkonen should be back in Rochester next year. And I think it should be with Tokarski. I think the plan that they wanted to institute this year should be the plan for next year. Re-sign Allmark, because Allmark has proven to be a top 10, top 15 NHL #1. And you got to get a guy to play with Allmark next year. Maybe a guy who's 24, 25. Maybe he, so he's got restricted free agency rights. You can keep his costs down a little bit. I look at like a Daniel Vladar in Boston, who would have been an ideal trade deadline candidate in the Taylor Hall trade. Well, if you look at what Boston was going through, they had Halak maybe a little dinged up, Tuukka Rask a little dinged up, Jeremy Swayman, who they like, who was played at Maine last year. They weren't going to move him. It's pretty clear that maybe Vladar can be a guy expendable. Maybe you couldn't get him at the trade deadline. Maybe you can get him in the offseason. I would like to see Allmark and a guy of that profile in Buffalo next year. Luukkonen, let him keep building up those minutes, right? Malcolm Gladwell, outliers, 10,000 hours. Get your hours in the AHL, and then when you come up, when it is his arrival, he's more prepared.
Do you view him as a #1?
Luukkonen?
Yeah, Luukkonen.
I do, yeah, because at every level, he's proven to excel, as long as he's not hung out to dry. And I think that when you look at his stats, with the exception of a couple hiccups that he's had, I don't have his numbers in front of me. I was trying to bring them up, but I'm not that good at multitasking. His numbers are comparable to what Allmark did his first year and a half when he came over from Sweden. Another guy that came off a double hip surgery, by the way. Some amazing parallels there between the two, except Luukkonen, they just invested a much higher pick. But I do see Luukkonen as a guy. I have no reason to think he's not a number one until his play tells you that he's not. When you draft a guy in the second round, it's implied that, you don't see a lot of goalies taken in the first round. So it's implied that he is a crucial part of your goaltending program moving forward.
So why would you sign another goalie to back up Allmark next year? If you have Allmark as a 1 and Luukkonen as your future 1, why do you think they need that bridge for
never have enough goalies? Yeah, you can never have enough goalies. I think creating competition is always healthy. It brings out the best in all your talents, and then you really know what you have too. When I always looked at Ryan Miller when he was here. He was better when he had someone around pushing him. He wasn't good when he had, Patrick Lalime carrying his bag for him. When he had Enroth here performing well, when Enroth got the net, Ryan Miller's best games were after when Enroth played. And I think that you want to create competition in your system. You should always want to have an abundance of talent at every position, and that's always been a weakness as far as I'm concerned, except maybe when they had that three-headed monster with Baran, Norinen, and Miller. We're going back like 20 years. So I want to buy time though too, Jonah, for Luukkonen to properly develop and allow the Sabres to stick to their plan with Luukkonen, and that's accruing those requisite hours to get to the NHL and be more viable when he's up there. He hasn't accrued those hours yet, and I think that's critical to properly developing a goaltender.
There are some fans out there that might be of the belief that, okay, so bring him up to the NHL, trial by fire, or even in a backup role. What would that do to his development, given his profile? You've been monitoring him. Nobody knows these guys better than you do. What do you think that type of approach would do for his development?
In terms of just throwing him in trial by fire?
Yeah, what are the risks? And what are the potential rewards?
I think his mental profile will allow him to handle both possible outcomes. Just his mental makeup and his approach to the game and how he makes things easy. He wants to get better. He wants to put the work in. I think he will see a success as just an extra motivator to know that he can do it and confirm his belief that he is an NHL player. If he has a negative outcome, I think it's going to be confirmation of the work and the plan that's been put into place for him and make him be even more bought into the plan that the Sabres have shared with him about his development and accruing those hours. I don't think this is a mentally fragile prospect. I think that he knows where he's at. I think he understands his ability, and he's ready to test it at this point, knowing himself. While he's excited, I do believe he knows that it's also maybe a little premature. So I don't see it, again, I was saying earlier, like I use that word deleterious as development. I don't see this as being bad because he has the mind and the approach and frankly, the ability to hang in there. But a lot of this is also going to fall on the team in front of him to do their jobs to help him talk to one another. If he's out there communicating and he's engaged in the game, he should have success. But he's playing a hell of a team. Boston has the ability to make a lot of guys look bad. Not only the skaters in front of him, but also the goalie that plays behind the skaters.
What's your view of what's happened to Carter Hart in Philadelphia and what lessons can be learned from that here in this situation?
I think it's a lesson about having the right coach. Alain Vigneault constantly kind of throws him under the bus in the media. Players don't appreciate that. Goaltending is 95% mental. The difference between an elite goaltender and a run-of-the-mill guy or a fringe guy is 1 goal a game. When you have a coach out there talking the way that he does about Carter Hart, that impacts his ability to make that one extra save. I don't want to throw Alain Vigneault under the bus, but this is not the first time that he's handled goaltenders this way. Mark Crawford was the same way. He didn't know how to manage his goaltenders. You can make an argument that maybe Lindy Ruff didn't know how to manage goaltenders. Carter Hart is young, talented, had a good start, and maybe it created improper expectations. And by the way, like when fans do this too, they look at you.
Good point.
Uh-oh. Oh, poor Kris Baker.
He got too worked up, and
He did.
Yeah.
I think it's probably like body heat. You know, he's probably thrown off all the equipment, all this technology there in his office from he overheated.
He has a threshold of how hot his takes can get before his computer freezes.
I mean,
Point that I, oh, you froze on us there, Kris.
You froze on us when you said the fans do this too, which was probably you were getting real amped up, and then you froze for 30 seconds, 40 seconds maybe.
So what do the fans do too?
yeah. All right. So, no, I think
Okay. I think you maybe
He's back.
were you were recalibrating there. So now I think you're back with us fully, Kris.
I think we're on
we're
delay.
good.
Damn this
It's gonna take some editing.
technology. Damn this technology.
Hold on.
I was going to mention when he said that Lindy Ruff was somebody who had a problem with goaltending is that he would not hide it. You know, he would openly talk about it. You know, he obviously was lucky when he was able to send Dominic Hasek out there for 72 or 75 games. But then when it came time to figure out what to do with Marty Baron and Bob Asenza and Mika Norinen, some problems, and he would roll his eyes and he'd mention it. It was kind of like the thing that he would say is like, if I could just figure that out, I'd probably be a complete coach. But yeah, that was one of his bugaboo. And it was fortunate that during his time with the Sabres, he was blessed to have some really good goaltenders that mitigated his ability to screw it up. Kris, are you back with us?
Hey, I'm back, guys. I'm back. Yeah, I could hear that whole spiel. I don't know what's going on. I just shut some windows in case it was me, but I think that we're a little unstable in the internet connection. But what I was saying about the fans is the comparison that they'll make to, you know, Carter Hart came up, and I think he's an anomaly. He's an exception and not the rule. He came up, you know, out of the WHL, went right in basically pretty quickly to the NHL, but he's not the barometer to measure Luukkonen against. I think maybe a guy like Tristan Jarry is, if that makes sense, where he paid his dues a little bit longer. He accrued those hours that we've been talking about. So, you know, it's not – Carter Hart's not the benchmark. He's still an exceptional goalie, and I don't think this is going to derail him in the long term, but his coach there doesn't help. I don't know if you guys caught that, but that was kind of the vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun to talk about him. People have been waiting to get a look, and it's one of the more common questions that I get from fans is, why is he not coming up with all of the different injuries and volatility that there's been in the crease for the Sabres this season? Let's give this guy a shot. Let's take a look at him. Everybody wants to play with their new toys. And so they're going to get a chance to look at him. It'll be something extra to draw us into watching this game Friday night. I want to get your thoughts on Don Granato and the job that he's done. I'll just give a quick thought before I throw it to you, Kris, or anybody else wants to chime in too. But I know Matthew's been on board that go ahead and give the guy the job or somebody else, as long as the list is short. Do not open it up, because that just invites the ability for the Pegulas to make a bad choice. The more options, the more chance that the Pegulas mess it up, is Matthew's take. So I'm in between. I like what the Sabres look like, of course. They're much better. They're a lot more entertaining to watch. But there's also something to be said, or a way you have to weigh it. If Ralph Kruger was that bad, as people are now saying, he was awful, he was terrible, then wouldn't anybody make a noticeable change? So how much are we overvaluing what Don Granato's done? Or should this be a situation where the Pegulas and Kevin Adams look at this and say, this is positive, and let's give him the job?
So I'm never in favor of marrying your slump buster. And that's kind of the path that you might be going down here. Now, with that said, I do believe that Don Granato's got a lot going for him in terms of his USA hockey pedigree, his ability to communicate with Gen Z, more of a teaching method, And by the way, these were some of the things that we said about Ralph Kruger also, not the USA Hockey pedigree part, but just his communication method and maybe his ability to tailor his message to each individual personality that he's managing. I think that there's a critical component here that's going to come into play where your point is right, Tim. Maybe the slump buster point is right. I think Matthew's point is right. I don't know what Jonah's point is, and I'd love to hear it. But I think there's a cost component. I think there's a cost component here too, where I'm not convinced that the Sabres are in any position to inflate their budget at the coaching position. If you just look at how they've managed the organization in the past 12 months, and they don't have a lot of revenue coming in the door right now. And it's not like this PSE is one big bucket of money. I do believe that they manage the Bills with a separate budget and the Sabres with a separate budget. I think you can pretty much prove that. So if there's a thought that Don Granato is not going to cost as much as some of the other candidates that might be on the market, like a Bruce Boudreau or a Gerard Gallant, I think the decision might be made for you. In that regard, knowing that he's here, he's got some traction going with this young group. They seem to be clicking. Guys are saying the right thing. The team's performing fairly well. You're a couple players away from maybe Don Granato really being like this linchpin hire at the end of the day. So I get it, where I wasn't on board right away, by the way. I think that the market around me or around us was quicker to hitch their cart to Don Granato. But at the same time, I'm a believer in his system and how he coaches hockey, and he's very offense oriented. And the guys, more importantly, this young group seems to be bought in.
I view this as a situation where you can rationalize, and I know I've said this before, so it becomes a bit of an echo, but for the sake of building on this conversation, and this is where I think it gets dangerous, is that if you are the Sabres front office, you can take a look at Don Granato as a rationalization that we actually had it right all along. He was on our staff. He was here. We just didn't fire Ralph Kruger early enough. Give us a healthy Jack Eichel and give us a healthy Linus Ullmark, and we're contending for a playoff spot if we're able just to pull the trigger on Ralph Kruger a little sooner. And it kind of adds to it. It kind of fudges that new voice, new leadership, while also saying you're maintaining consistency. And there's carryover. And this is a guy who's been working with these guys all along anyway.
Hey, if they want to think they're right, let them. I mean, I think it's ironic that they didn't make a judgment on Kruger until they realized that they could get fans in the door and start getting some dollars. I think that they would have played that out. They would have stretched that out as long as they could until they had to extend some goodwill to their fan base. And, maybe I'm not understanding the statement that you made, but I mean, if however it ends up, if it's the right move for the group, let them rationalize it that way. We're thinking they had the solution all along. You know what I mean? Part of me thinks so that they just didn't want to fire Ralph Kruger because of cost. And they only did it when they thought that they could get some dollars coming into the door. And hey, we can talk about the tank that way too. I mean, that tank was all about money. It's all about fan money and ratings for the organization that they, worked with on that one.
I wonder too, like
about money.
What Tim means by dangerous, or what's really the disaster situation here. Because I think if the Pegulas are still the owners and Kim Pegula is still the president, and they don't hire somebody to run the hockey operations, a new regime there, and they keep Kevin Adams, then they probably should go with the coach that fits that structure, the coach that Kevin Adams is most comfortable with. Have an off season, try to improve the roster in any way you can, and then evaluate how it goes next year. What's wrong with having one more year of seeing how it works with this group?
Because you're forfeiting the opportunity to open up a job search. It's the same thing as, well, we're comfortable with Kevin Adams. We're not going to have a job search to find out who our next general manager is. We're not going to listen to what other people have to say or what their ideas are on how they run this team from a general manager standpoint, but now even from a coaching standpoint. I think that if the Pegulas decide to drop the interim tag off Don Granato, especially if it's before the end of the season, and maybe they don't even do it, even if it's But if they don't even field offers or have coaches reach out to them who are available and say, I would like to coach your team, then you don't know who you have to choose from.
But you
No,
still
I
can do
think
that a
that's-
year from now if things don't work out.
Sure.
I mean, I guess it is a little bit
But
of a, we're accepting mediocrity, but it seems like there is some evidence with the contracts, with the way the cap is set up, that running it back with this group for one more year, giving Don Granato a chance to prove that maybe he is the coach this team needs, this roster, this core group, because it seems like there's some good chemistry. Jack Eichel's not around, but there does seem to be some good chemistry between the coach and the system they're running now and the current players.
Oh, I agree with you, Jonah. I think that this would be okay. I mean, if they wanted to make Don Granato the head coach permanently, I wouldn't have a problem with that. That I just wonder, for the sake of, the pros and cons of doing that, though, is are you limiting your options, or are you stunting your perspective that you can get from an opening up the job to however many candidates?
There's an opportunity cost there. You don't know what you're missing. You don't know. And this is a guy who was in the building for that historically terrible stretch of hockey that they played. And they had some bad injury luck, but they're also a very bad team. Even with this little rejuvenation that they've had. What do you guys think about the idea? Like, can they sell this? I think Kris has a better temperature on Sabres Twitter, certainly than I do, because, he has a lot more of those specific fans following him. Has it gotten to the point where they could sell this? Because I do think to an extent that matters, but I guess that's the question too. Can they sell it? And does it matter whether they can sell it? Because like you said, Kris, if it works, that's all that really matters.
I think there's the overwhelming opinion that Don Granato is the man for the job. I think there's a lot of folks that see what he's doing without his number one centerman and unlocking Rasmus Dahlin's potential. He's done it largely without his number one goaltender. I think there's a lot of things that the fans are excited about what Don Granato's done with this group. Now, has it equated to points? No. Did they end that losing streak? Yes. And did the team start kind of building and like a snowball going down the hill a little bit in terms of coming together and playing a more exciting style of hockey, by the way, which is also crucial to how the fans see this. They have. So I think there's a lot of things working in Don Granato's favor in terms of fan perception. I think at the end of the day, hiring Don Granato will make sense. Again, it goes back to cost. I can't think of another coach out there in the same salary range that's going to get the results that Don Granato does. And that's where I ultimately land. I think it's really a cost thing.
Here's another question for you. You mentioned, the hesitance to marry this guy. Do you have to marry a hockey coach? Because I think that's the other point that, I've seen brought up is like, oh, you're going out and hiring another guy. You have to commit to another 3 to 5 year rebuild. But how often do we see these hockey teams churn through coaches and find success, even successful coaches getting fired? I mean, if he can get them back to a baseline level of respectability that they've been missing for a decade, you don't have to commit to him for 5 years even.
That's right.
Do you even have to is hiring him even marrying him in this sport?
I think that, where Tim and I are very similar about coaching and just, hockey department or executive levels is that continuity. I do believe is important for any successful organization. Sabres haven't had that, both with the coaching staff and the GM. So I do think if you can marry a coach, I think that would be important. And, again, I don't see the risk in hiring Don Granato. The irony, to go back to the fan point, is that I'm in favor of a gentleman by the name of Nate Lehman, who's a younger, progressive USA Hockey pedigree guy. He coaches at Providence College. He's won a national championship there. There's a lot of NHL coaches that spend time with him in the summer to kind of share concepts and ideas. He's kind of that next big thing. And the feedback that I was getting was, you can't get another first-time coach. Those same people that were telling me that about Nate Lehman are now on board with Don Granato. who is a first-time NHL head coach.
Well, not anymore.
Well, not anymore, right? But it's funny how that works, right? So now I don't think there's risk here with Don Granato. Ultimately, I think that it's kind of like a bird in the hand and two of the bush type of thing, right? I think that you have a bird in the hand right now. It's not going to cost you a lot. Roll with it and come to terms and see what makes sense. And the Sabres have paid so many people to not work with them that maybe this is the one where maybe it works. Keep swinging, right? Keep swinging. Maybe this is their McDermott bean that they walk into. I don't know. You know what I mean? But the results are okay right now where I think it's going to work for them if they elect to go that route.
Maybe he's Freddie Kitchens.
Freddie Kitchens. How many games did he last?
I don't remember, but he was a great interim coach in Cleveland. Yeah. And then they slapped that permanent tag on him. Everybody in Cleveland was fired up because of how good Baker Mayfield looked in the second half of that season once they got rid of Hugh Jackson, who was essentially the Ralph Kruger of the Browns. And they got Freddie Kitchens in there. He's different. He's, and Baker looked great. They hired him, and then he didn't even last a full season, I don't think. So that it could go any number of ways, but you're right. This is one thing the Pegulas have not tried, hiring an interim coach. And it would cost – the cost is, I think, we can have all the debates about the hockey sense and everything else, but I think when it comes down to it, and we were talking about this with Vogel whenever we had him on a week or two ago, and that was the question I asked, and I think it kind of starts there, because if cost is a big factor, then going with the guy that's in your building is probably going to be the best move. You expand the search, you give the appearance of a search, and you lean on the results that he's had to sell it to a fan base that seems eager to buy it at this point. Because as Tim said, you're comparing it to Ralph Kruger and how bad this team looked under him, and it makes Don Granato look pretty good.
The one thing I'll say too is that there is a wild card in play here. So Kevin Adams should have that desire to cast a broader net just to confirm the Granato thought. The wild card though is Jason Karmanos, who we brought on as an assistant general manager, where there's an advantage there to just have another voice in the process, even though he's not the chief decision maker. He's an assistant general manager, but he has relationships around the league. It's just greater insight. They don't have a very large staff. I don't think that's a secret to anyone, but I do believe also that, how does a Jason Karmanos and some of the relationships that he has brokered over the years play into the process? Does it change that? Because really his sole responsibilities are going to be more oversight of the scouting departments and the AHL level. But there is experience there where he actually has more front office experience, a deeper book of, deeper resume than Kevin Adams does himself. And you almost wonder if there is influence there, even though it's not really in his core duties. But that's just something to think about. I go both ways on this, guys, on the coach thing. I was slow on Granato at first, but now I can kind of see where it could go, and I'd be okay with it as a consumer of Sabres hockey, someone who works hard during the day and wants to sit down and watch a good product.
That's where I've landed on. I think we started all in that same bucket of he came in and he said good things, and that was enough for some people to start, man, this guy is a breath of fresh air with what he's saying. And then Dahlin had a few good games, and it was like, look at, he fixed him. Like it's turning around. And I think seeing a bigger body of work has made me say, all right, this is a fine hire. You're not hiring him because he said some good things or because he's a good quote or because Dahlin had a few good games. There's a bit more of a body of work and a sample size to look at and say, all right, add a few pieces. Like Tim said, don't use this as an excuse to say, oh, everything was fine. Ralph Kruger was screwing it all up. And, once our goalie's healthy and once Jack Eichel's back, this thing's fine. I don't think you want to go that far with it, and I don't think they will. They have to recognize that they need to add to this roster and go into the season with more talent to, be competitive and not be the worst team in hockey again. But I don't think hiring this coach signals complacency necessarily. It probably does, though, signal a little bit of frugality, a little bit of, pinching your pennies. But I think Sabres fans have probably accepted that as a reality in the present and short-term, maybe even long-term future for this team.
The last thing I'll say on the coaching piece, I mean, we can talk about it more, but I mean, the one thought is I'm looking at the guys that come out of that tunnel in totality. So it's the players, but also the coaches and how they're performing as a group. And it's not just Darlene, but I think you have to look at a guy like Casey Mittelstadt also, who all of a sudden had a little bit of a rebirth here too. And he is now another guy that looks like a critical component to this team's success moving forward. He's garnering, I mean, really, I know he's listed as a second line player. He's playing really that line with Thompson and Asplund. They're playing like first line type. And when you get a Jack Eichel back, how much more effective are those guys going to be in this system with this coach when they get better matchups as they move down the lineup a little bit? And there's a lot to be said there too. It's not just Darlene, and everyone wants to talk about Darlene because obviously he's highly visible, first overall draft pick. But I don't want to gloss over Casey Mittelstadt and just this spike in his development. And he looks like the player that a lot of us or people in town thought he could be. And there's a reason, there's a payoff for not getting sour on a young player. Just to take it back to Luukkonen, and also if he has a bad game tonight, there's a payoff for not judging him on what he does in Friday night's game against the Bruins in his first NHL start.
What do you make of Mittelstadt's inspired play lately?
Just part of
I
that.
just want to make mention that when I did my piece where I quoted the anonymous captains about what's wrong with the Sabres, this was back obviously when Kruger was still the coach, but at that time one of the captains said Casey Mittelstadt has been nothing. I mean, it was a pretty biting quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but the word was he has been nothing, and he's been something.
It goes to show you that players that have been through it still, some of them don't know shit too about young players developing. That's what it shows you.
It didn't say, he didn't say that he will be nothing, but it was that he, at the time it was like, this guy's just they're wasting this guy. And
it was accurate at the time.
It was accurate at the
time, but it was also, we're in this, one of the things that bothers me about young players and kind of the spotlight that gets shined on them is that they don't have time to let it breathe, man. There's just no more time anymore. And maybe it was because it was on, it's on their dime. The fans are always right. They're the customer. They're paying to watch the team. And if you have a guy that's on the NHL roster, he's not performing, they have that right. But you can't lose sight of that he still could maybe go and reset in Rochester and he went down to Rochester last year. He had literally 2 bad games. And then he got it together, and he got better and better with each game. And when
Kris, there's another layer to this, or just one more aspect or wrinkle is that that we constantly have to deal with, and people like you who deal in the hockey world, especially with prospects, are constantly fighting. This is an NFL town, and there's that belief too, is that the big Bills fan who's the casual hockey fan sees that this guy's a high first round draft pick. And he's got to be out there now. And so that there's that added element from the fan of just total lack of patience that this first round pick needs to perform right away.
And listen, I mean, the fans were right for calling. That's Matthew's point. Okay. But there was still time if you have the ability to allow it to happen. I mean, if someone judged me when I was 21 years old, I'd be screwed. I would have never gotten anywhere. It's the same thing just because your team sucks, it doesn't accelerate human development. That's how I look at Casey Mittelstadt's development. He was brought up, he was thrown into a role way too soon, way over his head with the O'Reilly fiasco and everything else. And they just bit off more than they could chew. They reset him and it worked. So I'm not saying that, listen, there's nothing worse than a guy like me who never played in the NHL saying that a guy who played in the NHL doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not what I was saying. I'm just saying that we all have to have this bigger picture ability to give a guy time. Just like in any job. Tim, when you took your first job as a journalist, were you as good as you are today? Matthew?
Better.
Jonah? You need time, right? It's no different, man. So I think with Mittelstadt, though, he always was a guy who was highly skilled. He was always very competitive. He always had a fire in his belly to play along the boards. He wasn't a guy who was going to rough you up and play, but he competed. You knew he had all the pieces to become what he's starting to show now. And he's not out of the woods yet either. He still has work to do. This is what, a 10 or 15 game sample? But it shows you that if this is who he's going to become, he's looking good, man. And there's a lot of people that didn't give up on him. And I'm glad that those people are rewarded for that. That's that payoff I keep talking about.
What
So
allowed him to kind of flip that switch, though? He's played because he hasn't gotten that much older from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Something changed in the last month or so. Is it the coaching change, the system, the way they're using him?
a little bit of everything. I think it goes back to last summer. He works with Eric Rasmussen, former Sabre, on all of his, he had to learn how to eat better. Young kids that are, they come up, they're dominant just on sheer skill. You get to the NHL, you get to the AHL, everyone's as good as you, everyone's as fast as you, and a lot of people are stronger than you. And he had to learn. He had to learn. I think it's just part of the process that sometimes you have to, get beat up in order to get better and realize how much work you actually need to do. I think there's a lot of that goes on. They always say, it's the people that work hard when no one's watching. I think he did that a lot in the summer. I don't know if it was a switch so much. It was just part of the process. And I saw it last year when he went down to Rochester, and it was a shame when the season got cut off when he did, because I think he was about to come back up. And I think a lot of the negative things that were said about Casey Mittelstadt wouldn't have been said if he had came back up and had an opportunity to show the growth in his game and the progress that he made in that brief stint in Rochester. I truly believe that with him. And it's easy to say now, by the way, and I realize that.
What are your general thoughts? Oh, go ahead, Matthew.
Well, I was just going to say it's very much like Tim and his first journalism job, because Tim couldn't do pull-ups either, at first. And
never could.
Once he started working on it and could do some pull-ups, his copy really improved. I don't know.
Do you agree with that whole assessment?
Well, yeah. I mean, can he? Well, I was being silly, but can he do pull-ups now? Because you can say what you want, like a pull-up's not going to make you a better hockey player, but like not being able to do a pull-up as an elite NHL prospect speaks to what you're talking about, like eating properly, taking your strength training seriously. I mean, it's one pull-up. We're not asking him to be the pull-up champion. Like you said, he didn't need to do pull-ups to be as good as he was until he got to be 18 years old. But in the NHL, you need to have a little more something to you. The willingness is one thing. The body to do it is another.
After he's been in the league for about 6 years, I would like to ask him, do you regret not passing on the pull-up? I mean, he had to know, or at least if he has an advisor or something, he would have at least tried out, let's see how I'm going to do on the pull-up. And just,
that picture is terrible.
That's going to follow him around for the rest of his career.
I'm sure his buddies text that to him constantly.
Let's hope, I mean, for his sake and for Sabres fans' sake, that it becomes the Tom Brady combine photo,
right?
That people can look back on and laugh, as opposed to how the hell did the Sabres ever draft this guy? But we're seeing it now. We're seeing what captured the Sabres' imagination when they drafted him so early.
I think it speaks to Chris's point, is like this guy was physically, and it's what Tim says about how people forget that your top 10 pick in hockey might need some time. Like there's usually only a few guys that jump right in, and especially a guy that clearly physically wasn't ready to play against grown men quite yet. You have to both get your body ready to do it, but also learn how to, because he has the body that he has. He's not going to be a big, strong, bruising player, but it's about finding that middle ground of saying, all right, there are things I can do to become stronger. But then to Chris's point, learning how to play within that as well, saying, all right, I'm not going to be a banger. I'm not going to be a huge player, but there's ways to learn. There's stuff that works at the U, and there's stuff that works, at the NHL level. And I think he's starting to figure out what that is. And he's got talent. Obviously he's got a, vision for the game and, good hockey sense. So it's fun to see it kind of start to come a little bit more full circle for him when it looked like it had a chance to go off the rails.
And I don't want to, I just want to be clear too. Okay. This isn't a victory lap for myself or any others that didn't lose the belief that he would become the player that a lot of people thought he could be. I know it sounds like that. It was just really disappointing. A lot of the things that people were saying about him and how quick we're fascinated with tearing people down and giving up on people. And it was just really disappointing. When your Twitter mentions are full all summer about how Mittelstadt's a bust and all this other stuff, people said the same thing about Sam Reinhart. And it's just like history is. right there, though.
Hate watching of the team. It's that the fans have gotten to the point where it's so toxic, where the joy that they get, or I guess maybe the payoff that they get, joy is not the right word, but the payoff that they get is talking about how shitty everything is and looking for the next example of how shitty it is. And so it almost becomes, it was what the Bills dealt with during their 17-year playoff drought. So I think that people are more eager to find the thing that just is one more example about why it sucks to be a Sabres fan. It's easier to do that than it is to have some patience or look for the silver lining, or maybe the thing that might be the positive thing that might be coming around the corner.
Well, that's what I think a lot of fans.
Go ahead, Jonah.
Well, that seems like a lot of the culture around the team, and not to pick on Tim, but it seems like you kind of either like wallowing in that yourself or making, I think you like shining that mirror on the fans for that it's, a lot of fans seem to rather just wallow in the Sabres' defeat than actually, maybe not rather, but they seem more comfortable wallowing in the Sabres' lack of success than figuring out, can this team be successful and enjoying the little successes that they might have along the way and improving here and now.
Yeah, that's what fans are all about. And then when they start winning, the switch will be flipped and there won't be any gray area. It'll go right from everything sucks, we suck, look how bad we are, and kind of having that as their entertainment, almost like that's their laugh, to you cannot say anything bad about our team. You think of all the things.
That's what happened.
Exactly right. That's what I'm saying.
Celebrate their Pro Bowl punter, Brian Moorman, even if everything else was on fire around them. It was like, hey, at least we're number one in kickoff returns.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
This is kind of why I always ask the question of pretty much every, Waro, Vogel, Kris, when we have them on, is I think what happens is there's people who look at it and it's easier to just wallow in everything that sucks than say, because it sometimes it seems like there is no path forward. And it's why I ask every one of these, like, what is the reason for optimism? What can be fixed and in how long? Because people don't look at it. I think even in football, it's so short term and there's so much parity that you can think, okay, this team's not good this year, but a few free agent moves and the right picks, and they're going to be good next year. I think a lot of Sabres fans look and say, they're not good now, and I don't know when they're going to be good or how they're going to get good. And that creates, some of that attitude too.
I think that the tank did create like heightened expectations for all these young players. When you literally take 2 years off to get an 18-year-old hockey player, it creates expectations that every young hockey player that comes in has to be that next big thing. And I think it throws off your expectations. And I'm not going to fault the fans on that, though, because, like I said, they're consumers, the customers, right? And like even like they're just fans are just looking for enjoyment in their lives. And if wallowing in the failure gives them the enjoyment, that's what they're going to do. And I'm never going to really like be mad at them for that, even if it bugs me, because I know what people are going to say. Oh, you're like the den mother of the prospects. Well, it's like, no, we've seen success come when they're 22, 23, and sometimes 24. It doesn't have to happen at 18. There is no cookie cutter approach. It's not an assembly line where every human develops at the same rate. And that's been my whole point all along. So again, this might come up with, what happens if it happened with Tyler Myers, won the Calder, maybe took a step back, took him a little while. He's still a serviceable player. Happened with him here. But it's just, humans are different, man. Everyone's different. They develop at different rates. And sometimes you have to see a bigger picture, not just crush every young person because they're not Connor McDavid out of the box, and that's kind of what I felt was going on in Mittelstadt. And that's why I was disappointed, Tim, in your piece when maybe I perceived it incorrectly when a former player should have seen it, but maybe you're right. Maybe they're just saying he's been nothing. But that player has to own that too, by the way. Coach can't always just bring it out of you. The player's got to own that.
It was an indictment of the fact that the Sabres organization is killing this guy. That they should have, and in fact, I think that the comment included that the Sabres should have advised him to stay at Minnesota. That don't bring him in. Like they should not, and that they rushed him, and there was nothing to show for it at the time.
So I was wrong about that, though, too, by the way. I was for Casey Mittelstadt coming out of school. I was for him being plugged into the lineup. We just watched Nico Hischier the year before play first and second line minutes, number one PP with Taylor Hall in Jersey and do really well. And I said, if Nico Hischier can do that, so can Casey Mittelstadt. I was wrong about that, about how quickly he can go. But I think the difference between me and some of the other people I'm talking about is that I didn't want to lose sight of the bigger picture. Maybe it's hard-headed. Maybe it's because I had Casey Mittelstadt ranked third in his draft class. Maybe there is some of that, and you know what I mean? But I was wrong about how quickly he could ascend, but still didn't lose sight of what he could be. And I'll take ownership of that. I'm always very forthcoming with that and admitting I was wrong about Mittelstadt.
I think it's more difficult too to keep the big picture in mind. And like you said, realize that a prospect might take until 23, 24 to be what he's going to be when you don't have established NHL talent winning you games. Most other fan bases of good teams don't pay this close of attention to the NHL draft because they say, well, those guys aren't going to be in the NHL until three more years. And then all of a sudden some guy pops up out of nowhere and they're like, wow, this guy's really good. Like, when did we get this guy? Oh, he was a first round pick a few years ago. Like, what do you know about that? Whereas here, at least since I've been here, got here in 2014, it seems like every first round pick is immediately supposed to be, oh, this will be, you just start listing off the names of these guys that are going to automatically look at all this talent and they'll be in the league in 1 or 2 years. And this will be a roster to contend with, missing the fact that you're not going to hit on every first round pick. You might not even hit on half of them. And like you said, it takes time, but you can probably take it all the way back to the tank and ripping apart a roster of any serviceable NHL talent that can help you contend in the short term while young players figure out who they are and, realize, their development and their potential.
It's all over the place. There is no blueprint because, the fans rightfully will question why it should take multiple years for a guy that you draft eighth overall. But let's look at Rasmus Dahlin. He's in his third year right now, final year of his entry-level contract, came and played right away. He's just starting to scratch the surface, if you think about it, in terms of consistently being a play driver. Victor Hedman was first overall. I don't want to say it took him 5 years. If you look at some of his underlying statistics, maybe it took him 3. That's a first overall player. Again, out of the box. It's different. It's just there's patience. And history is there for all of us to see, but a lot of us choose to not look at it. It's right in front of our eyes.
I think too, a good portion of the doom scrolling or hate watching of the Sabres, and you guys have all mentioned it, the tank, going back to that and the poison that was, not necessarily the tank in and of itself, but what it wrought in terms of all the rhetoric, is that you had so many people who built up an opinion, and every little development that they see with the team is founded upon what was my opinion on the tank and how that evolved, or whether it was good, bad, or how they screwed it up, or that it was the right thing to do and they still botched it. Whatever it is, everything is that, a phrase that I've used a little too much recently, but a feather in that nest of, all right, there's one more thing. So the people who were against the tank Mittelstadt sucks. Or even if you're for the tank, it might be, just one more reason how they got it right with Eichel, but they've whatever. So anyway, just wanted to mention that real quick. And I don't want to hold you all day here, Kris, but
Fine, man.
Let's roll it right into the next first round pick, and not who they're going to draft, but it looks like the Sabres are going to have a top 3 pick, right?
Yeah.
What can we expect? I know that the assistant general manager, Jason Karmanos, has just been hired. The scouting staff, such as it is, the fact that you have a 3rd overall pick, what's your take? I don't really know what noun I want to use here, but what's your opinion, your overview of drafting 3rd overall or better and not having the eyes or the analysis that you would want, especially a rookie general manager, to have while holding on to this kind of ammunition?
Bizarre year, first of all. Hard to get out and see prospects. Now, my nephew's playing in the USHL right now. There are 20 teams at every game so far that he's been at. that he's been a part of that team. So I know that scouts are out there. They're watching players live. I don't believe the Sabres are very much. But yeah, at the same time, I think they can gather a lot of information. And, I think that this draft has some good talent. You don't need to be first overall this year. If you are third, that's fine. I think you're going to get a really good player. And maybe there's a mistake to be made in the top 3 too, by the way, where maybe you have an opportunity to let another team make that mistake. It's a cop-out, but it does exist as a possibility. I think you have there's a great defenseman, and I know Sabres fans don't want to hear this, a 6'5" defenseman that if the draft was today and I had the first overall pick, I'd probably take him. Owen Power. He's got a great name. From the University of Michigan, played in the USHL. I'm a USHL honk or wonk. We can talk to Rodak about which one is right there. But I think that he's a special player. I can make a case for him being on, I might be on an outlier on this. I think I can put him on his own tier potentially because of his size and his skating. There's 3 guys from the University of Michigan that are probably going to go top 10 this year. You're going to get a good player, but I think ultimately what's going to happen with the Sabres is, you're not going to trade the pick. I don't even want to think about right now what they're going to do with Eichel. I'm assuming that he's part of the solution still moving forward. You're going to keep the pick. You're going to pick a player. And you might get a guy that isn't going to come in, right away. Kind of like the dovetails and what we just talked about. I mean, there's this kid, Dylan Gunther, out in the Western Hockey League right now. Just a really gifted goal scorer, natural goal scorer. If you can get a winger like that, I could make a case for him also. And there's some gritty, energetic, high motor. It's NFL draft season, so I'm going to use some NFL draft terminology. There's a high motor centerman from the University of Michigan, Matt Beniers, I really like also. Those are 3 players right now that I'd be looking at in the hopper for if the Sabres are in that top 3, if you were asking about players specifically. But
well,
I can see it going.
I wasn't really. I mean, it's great to have that overview because I don't know that stuff. You rattle that right off the top of your head. I think it's fantastic information for the fan listening to this. But so thank you. And that's, but I was asking more just in a,
approach to the draft.
Right. And we talked to John Vogel about this a couple of weeks ago, at the NHL draft, when you meet and you get together at the arena and you have that big table, who's even going to be sitting at the Sabres table? I mean, who's going to be shoving notes in front of Kevin Adams about, okay, this is the guy these next 5 guys are available. Here's our short list. Here's what we know about him, or that let's say they're presented with a trade that involves players. Who's going to help Karmanos and Adams digest any trade proposal? I'm answering this in my mailbag. It's not going to post until Monday, but do the other 31 general managers look at Kevin Adams and see a mark? Like he's going to just be getting inundated with proposals for that 3rd overall pick because people are going to say, hell, maybe he'll take one. I don't know. Let's just start throwing stuff at him. And who helps
they're going to test him?
Who helps him, cull through all this stuff?
Kris does.
It's a good question. That's a good question. And sorry for misreading, because I hear you that no one wants to hear me rattle off about this. So I get that. So
no, I do. I thought it was great because I don't know anything about the draft coming up, and a 6'5" defenseman. Sign me up. I mean, if the guy's that good and he can do all the things that you need that guy to do, then they'll bring him in.
Yeah, I hear draft and I just default because I just love that shit. But Jonah, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was gonna say, and maybe you're the wrong person to ask this because you are thinking about the draft 365 days a year. But what's the problem with trading the pick if you get a good offer and maybe you can bring in some 23, 24, 25-year-old players that fit with Jack Eichel in this core and try to compete for a playoff spot next year?
Oh, I think everything's on the table, okay? And I think everything should be on the table. I just look at what's in the system right now, and there's clear need for an elite player at virtually every position, including goaltending. Get another one, okay? And there is a goalie that's probably going to go top 10, by the way. But I think that to answer your question, Tim, no, it's a small group, man. I mean, it's a pretty empty hallway there at lunchtime at the arena right now. You know what I mean? So I think Jason Karmanos, that's one of the reasons why I was critical for Kevin Adams to make that hire quickly and to get some help and to get guys that have connections around the league, that have relationships that maybe Kevin Adams currently doesn't have because, Karmanos has been in the business for a while. So I think that's really where Jason Karmanos is going to play a big part. I don't think it's going to be Matt Pagula and Terry Pagula and, Kim. I mean, they'll probably be around. But, I think there will be other help. I mean, like Tristan Musser, who's a scout, he was with the Chicago Steel and the USHL. I mean, he's out there. I think he's gaining a lot of insight on a lot of these young players. I think an amateur scout like that is going to be critical. And I believe Kevin Devine is still around. Is he not?
He's Rasputin. He's always around, right? He'll be like I'm forgetting the name of the guy who was around forever, and he was like delivering the mail in the office, and then he was doing the goal horn at the games. Do you remember who that was?
Oh, I don't know. There's been a bunch of them, like Porky Palmer, but no, I think but here's the thing with Kevin Devine, though. I will say this: Kevin Devine has always been really good at knowing what team is on what player and mapping out how the draft is going to go leading up to this. He's always been really good at that. And just a skill like that is going to be pretty invaluable to a guy who's new to the space as calling the shots, And it's not like, I mean, you saw the video when they were doing the virtual draft in October. There weren't many people in the room. The draft table is going to look like that again. And I think they actually had a pretty decent draft. They made a good trade up to get Peterka. They got their guy they wanted, in the first round. Maybe the fans didn't like it. You know what I mean? So I think that it's gonna function very similarly. It's gonna be a very small brain trust, making some pretty big decisions. That's the witching hour for my dogs. Sorry.
I think what Tim is saying is that you need to clear your schedule and keep your phone on, because you might have to be at that table.
Hey, this is my nephew's. Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm ready to go for that. Okay. Like, I'm all on board. This is my nephew's birth year. He's not a draft, he's not going to be picked in the NHL, but a lot of these players we've seen for many years, just watching the tournaments and things like that. I mean, international tournaments in the United States is a great year for US born players. This is probably the most prepared I've been for a draft. They should call me, actually.
Which is actually, says something, considering, like you said, it's probably the least prepared a lot of scouts have been, because of what a weird year it's been. And because of, weird schedules and not seeing guys in person. Not talking about Sabres scouts. I'm talking about around the league. There's probably guys that don't feel as prepared as they normally do. And here you are saying you're as prepared as you've ever been. I think if you want to drop your cell phone number here, we'll open it up to all the NHL general managers that listen.
They have it. They know how to get hold of me. But
and it's plainly evident that the Sabres are going to be the least prepared team based on manpower and the fact that they haven't been scouting the entire globe like other teams have.
Well, here's the thing that's going on right now. So in 3 days, the IIHF World Under-18 Championship begins down in Texas. If you see some of the Sabres brain trust around when the Sabres are playing and they're not there, then you have a bigger issue. I would expect them to be there. Every country, most of the top prospects are going to be there, except for Owen Power. He won't be there. William Eklund from Sweden, he won't be. See, I'm doing it again. I'm going to stop. Most of the top prospects will be there.
He's making up names, Owens and Dillons and Williams.
But I would expect, so any perception that maybe they haven't been on the ball because they haven't been getting in-person viewings, the playing field should be level a little bit if they can get down to Texas and get some firsthand viewings of, I could see their whole roster of players that they pick coming from this tournament for the most part, except maybe for the first overall one.
Well, Kris, thanks for doing this. Jonah Bronstein had to split. He's on assignment tonight, so he couldn't stay for the end, but let's produce this podcast. Let's package it up so the folks can maybe listen to it before UPL's NHL debut and listen to what's what.
I hope that kid does well, man. I really do. Just for his confidence and just for the sake of the organization to get him going, to just push off from the dock in a positive manner at the NHL level, I think it would be nice to see. I'm always looking for a good story. The last thing I'll say is I tweeted last week. I was like, it's just delightful watching Mittelstadt have success. And most people got it, but there were a couple people that were like, you're an asshole. Like, there's nothing delightful about this season. And I was like, all right, well, I still look at like the individual stories. You're always looking for like a good story.
Sure.
And that's kind of how I always approach it with this team. And maybe I am the Den Muller of these kids. I don't know. But no, thanks for having me.
I mean, Dylan Cousins fought somebody, and that was considered front page news for about 3 days. I mean,
Yeah.
Casey Mittelstadt performing for a couple of weeks should be considered delightful.
Think of where Dylan Cousins is going to be in 2 years. He's going to be a beast, man. But again, I can go on and on about these guys, so I'm gonna put a governor on myself. But no, thank you very much for having me. It's always good to catch up. Sorry I misread a couple of your questions. It's been a long week.
You didn't misread any of my questions.
So, but no, this was always good, man. It's always good catching up with you guys.
I know who I'm talking to. I know what I'm going to get. I ask
Sure,
these
you do.
questions so that way we just get a bunch of information. We've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes.
Have we really?
Yeah.
Holy cow. Well, I apologize to your listeners then.
Anybody you would have to apologize to checked out, so they didn't hear that.
That's true.
You can probably
Anybody who's made
apologize
it
to
this
them in
far
person.
is thanking us and loving every minute of it.
It's always a pleasure, gentlemen.
What was that, Matthew? I'm sorry, I stepped on you.
I'm saying a lot of the people you'd be apologizing to, you could probably just apologize to them in person. All
That's
those
right.
listeners.
All right,
It's
I'm
true.
sure we'll cross paths. I might be thirsty this weekend.
Tipping the cap to you.
My gear came in as well. My Sioux Falls gear.
Last thing I'll say, Tim. Oh, the best
gonna-
junior hockey. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to muse. I was going to say out loud, I wonder if Rio Salado has a hockey team.
I don't think
I
so.
have my gear here.
Yeah, so the best junior hockey promotion of all time. This team here, the Sioux Falls Stampede, for one night a year, they become the Sioux Falls Fighting Wiener Dogs.
No kidding.
How awesome is that? That's an
Also-
incredible promotion. They rebrand for a night.
Just one game.
I think it was just one game.
And we
Yeah.
also got a customized jersey.
Oh, for Huddy.
So they do wiener dog races. It's incredible. It's a
On
great
the
promotion.
ice?
Now
They
I
give
just
them
get
a-
one that
They
says
roll out a red carpet, or is it on the ice?
I don't think it's on the ice.
now I
don't
just
think
need
it's
one
on
that says Baker on the back. What
we'll
numbers
see.
is Jackson rocking in Sioux Falls?
He is born March 3rd, 2003. He is 33 is his number.
It's a good goalie number.
Patrick Waugh thought so.
That's right.
All right, boys. Thanks for doing this. My thanks also to Jonah Bronstein, who couldn't stay until the end. But thank you for listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.